How do you ask questions? How do students ask you questions? How do students ask each other questions? Why all the questions about questions? I'm R.V. Gundur, a lecturer in criminology, and today I'm going to address these questions. Asking questions and having them answered is a critical experience at any learning level. Questions are central to the process of learning, and we need to think about how they work in online spaces. I'm going to talk today about the technologies I use to facilitate question asking. But before I do that, I want to talk about why questions are important. As teachers, we use questions to gauge how well our students are understanding what we are trying to communicate to them. And students use questions directed at us or their peers to clarify meaning or explore ideas when they need to. Think about questions that you've been recently asked, especially ones that took you off guard. They likely caused you to think. They force you to reflect as you crafted an answer or as you went away to think of one. Okay, now think about a question that you've recently asked, a question that really mattered to you. You more than likely remember not only the answer, but how that answer was delivered. In both asking and answering questions, we learn something. Now, that may be obvious, but sometimes we don't reflect about how easy or hard it is to be able to ask a question in different settings. And that is a truth that works in every direction that we can think of question asking in an educational setting, from student to teacher, teacher to student, student to student. And when we don't address frictions in the ability to ask questions, we create problems for learning outcomes. We need to make sure that everyone is comfortable asking questions, and to ensure that, we need to return to the other two questions I posed at the beginning of this video. How do I ask students questions, and how do students ask me questions? Let's dig in. When I was a school teacher, that process of asking a question was pretty similar every time. It happened in person, and my students and I connected in a shared moment. That connection had a lot of points of contact, including the tone and confidence of the question and the response, the eye contact, the body language, and how those elements manifested in other students who were listening to the exchange, and the answer to that exchange. But at most, I had 35 children in my classroom. That was the state limit. It was a big group, but we were together, present, in a shared, comfortable, and safe space. And we asked each other a lot of questions all day long. When you're used to comfortable, safe spaces, you're more likely to ask questions, right? And when we feel able to ask questions at school, we feel like we belong. Now here at Flinders, I've had more than 500 students at once in class. And I'll be honest, thinking back to when I was a student, I found those mammoth groups to be uncomfortable spaces where it wasn't easy to ask questions. And now online, the experience is even more difficult. With massive online groups, raising your hand to voice a query is really intimidating, and it's often a crappy experience, particularly if bandwidth and connectivity issues could mean that your voice isn't heard well. I think we've all struggled with digital learning. The lack of images and sounds deprives us of valuable information about our students. The sensory deprivation also impacts the relationships that students have vis-a-vis their peers, common partners for asking and answering questions. So those deficits mean that ensuring that we can have successful question exchanges becomes all the more important online. Because not only is it difficult for students to ask their teachers questions, it's difficult for students to ask their peers questions too. So my goal has been to try to make large group and online settings feel smaller and immersive. When thinking about questions, I work to that goal by asking 3 other questions. First, how am I supposed to ask my students questions? Second, how are my students supposed to ask me questions? Third, how do I ensure that students have a space to ask each other questions? There are 2 ways that question asking occurs. Asynchronously, where students and I ask and receive answers at different points, such as what you'd expect to have on email or a message board. Or synchronously, where the students and I share a space and have a direct real-time exchange, such as you would expect to have in a face-to-face classroom experience. This semester, I'm delivering all of my content via videos and podcasts especially produced for the topic I'm teaching. Certainly preparing videos and podcasts at a high standard takes a tremendous amount of preparation time. Let's not kid ourselves. Good videos take at least 4 to 8 times as long as good face-to-face lectures to prepare. And a lot of that is because of the need to anticipate questions, answer them, ensure that there are no mistakes in your presentation, and deliver a product that is engaging. When you're up against a world of gifted communicators on YouTube that students are used to learning from, that's no easy task. And despite our very best efforts, students will invariably still have questions. So let me address my questions from before. Let me start with the last question first. How do students ask each other questions? Now, I'm a firm believer that we all benefit from listening to our peers' questions, so I demand that questions that are not personal in nature be placed in a forum accessible to the entire peer group. When students share questions in a group forum, they generally get answers faster. They see their same questions answered already, and they understand that asking questions is a normal part of learning. The added bonus is that this reduces emails on repetitive questions from students significantly. Many folks use Flow to achieve this end, but I find the message boards on Flow are clunky and threads are hard to search. So this semester I've trialed using Slack. Now Slack is a technology which is widely used in workplaces, so getting students comfortable with it helps improve job readiness. Slack is free and you can force students to use their university emails to sign up. That means that all exchanges are attributable to our students, which discourages bad behavior. It is a widely used application that has powerful search and indexing features. In my experience, students engage with it well. They ask questions to the group and sometimes answer questions for each other. It's a way to build a bit of community when physical proximity isn't happening. In order to help build community, I've eschewed synchronous online tutorials and replaced them by having students do engagement exercises using Flipgrid. Flipgrid is a Microsoft product and, like Slack, is connected to the student's university email. Students have really taken to doing the videos, presenting their answers and asking and answering their peers' questions. These videos generate hundreds of minutes of engagement, and students have fed back that they are enjoying being able to recognize their peers and address them in a personal but asynchronous way. I have significantly higher engagement with this strategy than I did running Collaborate sessions, where my teaching assistants and colleagues reported low turnouts and even lower engagement. Do these systems replace face-to-face question asking? No. But so far, they provide the best opportunity for students to connect academically when they are not in proximal spaces. Now, how do students ask me questions? Obviously, for personal questions, I have students email me, or we have one-on-one virtual sessions over platforms like Zoom or WebEx. But there is also a need to make sure that question asking happens in real-time synchronous sessions. Sometimes synchronous teaching is the only way to go. We don't always have the time or the capacity to make slick videos. Remember, when students engage with us in real time, the experience is more like a conversation. So if we have bloopers, it's not such a big deal. We can correct them and we can move on. But it's critical that both students and teachers have the capacity to ask questions and clarify misunderstandings. So what did I do to do that? I used a platform called Sli.Do. Now, Sli.Do is a platform that is free to use for students and has various plans for instructors, the most basic of which is also free. The free plan allows you to create up to 3 polls per session, giving you the ability to ask students questions and receive feedback from all of them. You set the polls up ahead of time and they integrate into your PowerPoints. You use your cell phone as a remote control to switch between the polls and your PowerPoint. It's easy. I use these polls to do heat checks on my students. I'll ask a question that relates to the last segment that I was just talking about. Now that does 3 things. It forces the students to reflect on the content we just covered, gives me an opportunity to see if they have understood what I intended to communicate, and gives us a break from me talking. Let's be honest, I'm no Barry White, or even Barry Manilow for that matter. Sli.Do also allows students to ask questions throughout the session so they can engage when a question occurs to them without interrupting my flow. I then answer questions at set points throughout the session. When it's working well, students can see their peers' questions and upvote them, indicating that they had the same question too. And for big groups, Sli.Do works. Now, I'm going to get as serious as a Glasgow smiley face for a second. There is one disadvantage with Sli.Do, and in my view, it's a biggie. It's an anonymous platform unless you have the pro version. With the free version, you can't attribute the comments made to the individual student. Some students are encouraged to ask questions that they are otherwise shy to ask, which is great, but other students engage in malicious or mean-spirited trolling behavior when they're allowed to be anonymous. I know it's shocking to some of you, but please remember it's the type of vitriol that any of your colleagues who are people of color, foreign or female, experience regularly in this job. Fortunately, there are two solutions to this trolling behavior, and they're relatively simple. The first solution is moderate the input, and the second is to use the Pro version, which links to Okta and other identity providers. Moderation requires a second person and a paid subscription to the teacher level to do this, because you can't talk and moderate simultaneously. The nastiness doesn't hit the big time when you have moderation, and the trolls are left powerless. Other students keep being able to ask questions and engage in a positive learning environment. Okta integration requires the Pro version, which is a step beyond the teacher moderation. It might not stop trolling in the moment, but you can sanction the student afterwards, which should be deterrent enough. If you can't have moderation or Okta integration, then using Sli.Do is a risk. Ultimately, do I recommend Sli.Do? Absolutely, but only if you can have those sorts of supports that allow you to use it without risk. Sli.Do definitely enhances how questions can be asked in large group settings and virtually. I'm R.V. Gundur. If you'd like to talk more about these technologies, please drop me a line, or if you're interested in what I do, check out my website, ravejudgerun.com, where I've linked to my academic and teaching materials. That's it for me. Goodbye and good luck.